Oh my God. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 20. It's the summer, and normally we like to relax a bit with our format. And in the past summers, we've done summers of sci-fi and indulged in some lighter fare. So this summer, given how absolutely insane 2020 has been so far with its pandemics, murder hornets, and whatnot, we thought that we would try our survival skills with some 70s disaster movies. And we are starting with what may be the quintessential 70s disaster movie, The Poseidon Adventure. So I will, I guess, get us started going here. Had either of you seen this movie before we decided to do this summer of disaster?
I am pretty sure I'd never seen it, sat down and saw it in its entirety until now. When I was watching it, there were scenes that I know I've seen over and over again when it was on TV in the past. But I think this might have been my first time sitting down and watching the whole thing.
Yeah, I had seen parts of it, and I've seen the remake that came out, I think in 2006. And then I actually was on the Queen Mary, where a lot of the at least pre-disaster scenes were shot. So yes and no, but this was my first time, I think, actually watching it from beginning to end and not just catching glimpses of it on TV. It's wild.
Yeah, it is, and my history with it is pretty much the same as y'all. I feel like I know I've seen it before, but it has been so very long that I really only remembered spots, little bits and pieces. So it really was like rewatching it for the first time, I guess, until those few spots I remembered did show up. So what were your thoughts? I liked it, but it's an interesting movie, that's for sure.
I realized when I actually watched it this time that I had not seen the opening part of it, because I feel like any time that you have a kid with that many freckles running into the engine room of a ship, that's immediately a bad omen. Just from that first scene, I was like, oh, obviously I knew how the movie was going to end, but I was like, how could that not be a bad omen? This little kid who looks like he's about to wreak havoc on everything comes running in, and even the captain is kind of like, what are you doing here?
Well, he runs in the middle of a storm, no less. It's what did they say? It was 10, 15-foot waves that were crashing down, and in comes this 10-year-old into the what, I'm completely drawing a blank on the word for it, but the place where the captain is and directs everything.
The bridge.
That right. Place. The bridge. Thank you. Oh my God.
The bridge.
It's Wednesday and it's already been a week, folks. So
yeah, I was about to say we should probably say that probably none of us are going to get any of the technical terms right for a boat or a ship or anything that floats on water. So we'll just put that disclaimer out now.
True, but I feel like bridge is something that that's low-hanging fruit. I feel like I should have hit that. I've watched enough Star Trek at least, but either way, yeah, it's like the kid just comes barreling in. And it was bizarre.
It was, and then almost immediately, and I had forgotten that Grandpa Joe is in this movie. Yes. And I was very, very excited. So,
Grandpa Joe and Shelley Winters.
Yeah. I was more excited to see him, Grandpa Joe.
Well, and I know neither one of you really spends a whole lot of time on Reddit or places like that, but I think it's on Reddit. There's a subreddit called basically screwed Grandpa Joe, and it's all about how much of a jerk he is for pretending to be disabled and then suddenly being fine. So as soon as I saw him, like, I kind of mumbled that under my breath and just kind of laughed because, yeah, that I couldn't think of another movie that he's been in besides Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But now we've got
Although
two.
I will say, I think he gets a bad rap for all that because it wasn't that he was pretending to be disabled. It was a chocolate miracle, Matt. Like, that is what happened. It was a chocolate miracle.
I'm merely reporting on the internet. I'm not saying I subscribe to it. I'm not necessarily one of those people with all the Grandpa Joe hate. I was just, if you had said name another movie that actor is in before I watched the Poseidon Adventure just a couple days ago, I would not have been able to answer that. So, but I mean, I guess maybe we could do a quick rundown of the characters too for the listeners that haven't seen this movie, because there's a lot of archetypes, I guess, if you want. A lot of stereotypical people. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I was surprised in watching this, because okay, we've already mentioned there's the freckled kid who is obviously the bad omen. I mean, clearly. He's alone on the ship with his sister. So the ship itself, so just to kind of put you in the setting here, it's New Year's Eve. It's the SS Poseidon, and they're making their way from New York City to Athens, Greece. And this is when they hit it opens on the storm, and then they hear that there's the earthquake that's going to cause the tsunami. There's a lot of things going on, but our cast of characters, we learn later that the kid is there with his older sister, and they are apparently traveling alone on the ship going to meet their parents, I think. So I thought that was an interesting choice to have these two kids traveling alone. I mean, because anytime you put children in a disaster movie, it automatically feels like the stakes are raised. I don't know if that's kind of a cheat on the movie's part, but it feels that way to me. So first, am I forgetting anything with the children? I think they were the only children we saw on the
think
ship.
So. I think so. Well, and I will in general agree with you about that with the children in a disaster movie. I do feel like they didn't really do much with them once the disaster hits, with the fact that they're children, if that makes sense, except for like here and there. It felt like it was an opportunity that needed to be used better, I guess. But yeah, I think that's really it.
I did kind of like that the kid, because part of the reason he was on the bridge in the first place was because he's obsessed with the ship, and so he knows everything about it, and that ends up being what saves them all in the end, because he knows exactly where the 1 inch of metal is that they're looking for, to actually escape out once everything happens. And I thought that was kind of a neat little thing, was the way they played around with the fact that you had all these older, experienced people on the ship, but they were having to listen to the advice and the knowledge of this little boy. I don't know.
Well,
That was kind of an interesting little thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even Ernest Borgnine kind of calls him out a little bit at one point, like, why are we listening to this kid? And come to find out, yeah, kid knows a lot about the inner workings of a ship. His friend, the engineer, took him to the boiler room at one point, which that line delivered in 2020 would have a lot more menace, I think, to it than in 1972.
Definitely. Well, we already mentioned, so there's the kids, and I guess they were supposed to represent like the innocence, and the innocent lives, I guess. But then you also have Grandpa Joe and his wife. They are going to see their grandbaby in Israel. So you get the kind of typical backstory for all these archetypal characters, I guess, to make you feel something for them. And they all have their reason for needing to survive, I guess. Like the kids need to get out to see the parents. Grandma and grandpa want to see their grandbaby, because they mention at one point that the baby's already 2 years old and they've never seen him in person. So they're making this long trip to go see him. And it's all very sweet. And you're right, Grandpa Joe, however you feel about him in Willy Wonka, he is a very sweet man in this movie. And he might redeem himself. So that was really, really sweet, I thought. What were some of the other characters you guys noticed?
Well,
Well,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mel.
of course, you have Gene Hackman as the kind of rebellious priest or preacher. I don't know what. He was a cleric. He didn't have a collar or anything. And so you have the debate between him and the more traditional cleric. And Gene Hackman is all about survival and not waiting on God. And was it God wants winners and people who try? And it was very like motivational speaking. And so he gives a sermon at the beginning, which is how he makes contact with every person, all the famous people who, get to escape, unlike the extras that get trapped in the ship. And then you have Ernest Borgnine, who's playing a hardened, like, New York police detective who's happened to marry a woman of the night who is trying to change her life. So
Wait,
you also
stop,
have that character as
stop.
well.
Yeah. I think we need to slow down
stop.
for this.
We need to stop, because Matt was already saying that, the engineer or whatever taking the kid to the boiler room in 2020, that would be a problematic line. And the whole detective's storyline, I think, would be, I mean, I don't even know how it happened in this movie, because we don't even know them very well. And she says, "You arrested me 6 times." And he
Well-
says, "It's the only way I could keep you safe until you fell in love with me," or something like that. And I was like, what?
Well,
What is
and they
happening?
in that conversation they're alluding to it a little bit earlier, because she says basically she's nervous to walk around the ship, and he's like, "What do you expect you're going to meet some of your like clients?" I don't remember the exact line, and she's like, "Well, I saw one guy and he looked mighty familiar, but he had his clothes on," and it's like it just felt like the whole that whole plot point just felt like a why is this in here, because it never comes back up again after that scene in the beginning when they're introduced, like the fact that she's a former well, I like Lady of the Night, yes.
But that's why she has to die, because she just basically flings herself off into the fire because she's a bad woman. I mean,
Yeah,
it was set up from the beginning.
she's a sex worker, and he was a cop who was apparently very obsessive towards her and possessive of her, and just kept arresting her until I guess she agreed to marry him, which, yeah. And you're right, Matt, it doesn't come up later, because when she dies, there's that whole like impassioned speech he gives of, she was the only thing I ever truly loved. And I'm like, well, you could have just introduced them as husband and wife or something. Like, I don't know why there was this elaborate backstory.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is that maybe that was to explain the age difference, because there was a clear age difference between Ernest Borgnine and her. I mean, not to say that she was like super young, but I mean, if she was in her 30s, he was in his 50s or 60s. Like, he had gray hair and was balding. And maybe that was added to explain that age difference. If not, it was a big gap regardless. So
I'm curious, because I have not, in fact, I did not know this was based upon a book. This was apparently based upon a book that came out in 1969 with the same name by an author, Paul Gallico, who I've never read anything of his. I'm curious if that storyline is in the book and if maybe he did more with it. Because I'm like you, I don't know why else they would do it. They could explain the age difference in easier ways, surely. Right?
Certainly. Well, and that was kind of my thought too. Maybe it was a bigger plot point in the novel, and it just got dropped for time or something. I don't know. But it's a little baffling as it is. It just kind of it's thrown out there, and I guess it doesn't quite stick to the wall, and it never comes back up again. So
Yeah, it's weird. It's very odd.
Well, I mean, she's the only one that has her husband get mad at her when she has to take her dress off to climb the Christmas tree because she apparently doesn't wear underwear all the time. So it did come up then.
Can we just say, can we point out here too how unfair it is that I felt so sorry for these women who were having to climb all over this ship, because most of them could take off their dress and they had like something, little shorts or something underneath it. But they were still running around that ship and climbing everything in full on party heels.
yes,
And
I noticed that towards the end. Like it didn't connect with me until towards the end, and I was like, oh, they're still wearing their like New Year's Eve shoes and stuff. Wow, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think they deserve a little extra applause for for making it through that, because man, that would be intense.
And apparently, just the filming of the movie was miserable from one of the interviews I read with Carol Lindley about how wet they were and uncomfortable, and there weren't safety precautions in the beginning. So I think they were also like uncomfortable in real life.
Oh man, I can imagine. They looked it. Okay. So let's see, we got the young kids, we got grandma and grandpa, we got creepy detective and his lady of the night. We have the haberdasher.
Mm-hmm.
He was an odd little character.
The bachelor that works too hard and takes all the pills.
Yeah. That's all we know about him is he says he runs a haberdashery, and he never takes time off, so he doesn't have time to meet anybody, but he's very sad about that. Apparently he wants to meet somebody, so he's kind of a lonely heart. And he takes an abnormal amount of vitamins.
And he runs strangely. I think some of that may have been the ship itself, but he looked like he was in the Ministry of Silly Walks when he was trying.
He was played by Red Buttons,
right?
That might explain it.
But again, a very sweet character. I mean, kind of like Grandpa Joe's character in this. Like, he was a very sweet character. But I was interested because when they introduced him as like this vitamin guy, this like health nut, I thought, oh, like maybe they're going to play up something, because they introduce a lot of big themes in this movie. Like, Mel, you already mentioned the minister and the priest getting in the argument over like the nature of God and how people should pray and all this. Like, it was this pretty hefty stuff for a disaster movie. Okay, we're getting into the nature of God here. But then it was also kind of their outlook on life too. Like, what was important? Like, the only thing important is finding love or work, or also like the things we do to protect or prolong our life, like taking all these vitamins, which I guess was supposed to seem like a futile act, knowing what's coming. But then again, they didn't do anything with it. Like, things are just introduced and kind of dumped in front of the audience, and then they're never brought up again. So But yeah, he was an interesting character. I liked him.
Well, then he and the singer created a relationship extremely quickly.
Were we supposed to believe that they were falling in love?
I mean, that's kind of what it seemed like they were pushing toward. Which I thought it kind of felt uncomfortable. Well, uncomfortable is not the right word, but like there just wasn't enough evidence for it. So I would have these moments where I'd be like, I think they're supposed to be falling in love, but I don't know. She's terrified and depressed because her brother died. And I don't get enough from him except he power walks and takes pills. So there just wasn't a lot of character development there. And all the Shelley Winters character was like flirting with him before they crashed. And I didn't understand why that was happening because there was no follow-up or explanation unless she was just trying to be motherly toward him, maybe, and I was misinterpreting.
And we didn't
Um,
even talk about the Shelley Winters character about how, and again, I know this was like in the 70s, but there were at least 3 jabs made at her weight
oh yeah, all the body
in this
shaming was pretty
movie.
horrible. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, I feel like that would not fly today. At least I hope it wouldn't.
But she became the hero because she could swim so well.
Yeah, but she still had to say, despite my size, I can swim
Right.
well.
Well,
Right.
and
Kind of sucks.
her great swimming caused her to have a heart attack too. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Are we forgetting? I feel like that's the main group that we follow throughout. I don't think we're forgetting anybody.
Oh, Roddy McDowell played the dude with the hurt leg, the waiter who dies pretty quickly.
Acres.
Acres, yeah. Which I was like,
Yes.
wait, that was Roddy McDowell. Oh, he was
Yeah, it's kind
barely
of a
there.
blink and you miss it.
And then Leslie Nielsen is the captain, and I can't remember who played the bad corporate dude that was making them go faster with too much being top heavy. They died in the first like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the captain and his crew did not make it very far into this movie.
well, and I liked the jab at the corporate guy too. Like that's more stuff that they kind of throw out there that they never really follow up on with. But apparently this is the final voyage of the Poseidon because it's going to be decommissioned, and that's why the corporate guy's in such a hurry. Is they have a wrecking crew waiting at the docks, and like they're already behind schedule, and his whatever group can't afford to keep paying the wrecking crew. So I guess we're supposed to. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously we're not supposed to like him, but I guess we're also supposed to feel a little bit of sadness. This is the final voyage of the ship, and all this goes down. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bad
And
way to go out.
for all of this to go down too, let's remember when it actually takes it down, because I mentioned it was New Year's Eve, and it pretty much happens at the stroke of midnight. That the tsunami like topples over this ship, which I thought was impeccable timing.
I mean, it really was. It's the best way to bring in the new year, I guess. I mean, it definitely turned things upside down. Haha.
Boo. Just boo.
Yeah.
For shame.
Sorry.
Okay, so we have our group, because this is what happens, and I'm just going to go ahead and say, now that we've introduced ourselves to the core group that we follow throughout, I made a list as I was watching the movie of disaster movie rules. And I'm curious, as we start our summer of 70s disasters movies, how many of these rules we're going to see. Because I feel like in all of these, you have to have these things. So I think one of them is that you have to have a group that splinters off from the bigger group, because you've got to have something bad happens, whether it's going to be a ship going down or a building going on fire or something. And there's going to be a big group of people panicking. And then there's immediately, like we see in the ballroom, there's a group of people saying, if you just stay here, help will come and get you. Like, just stay put and trust that help will find you. And then there's this smaller group of people who are going to be like, nope, we know the way, we got to get out of here. And so you immediately have to kind of make that decision of who you're following, right? And one thing I found very interesting about this is rather quickly you get to learn that they made the right decision, because they are not out of the ballroom, but maybe a minute before everybody who stayed behind in the ballroom pretty much meets a watery death. I mean, they see it in front of them, right? So you immediately have the splintering off of the groups. There's always got to be one man in charge of that group who is trying to take charge while there's another man who's going to argue it with him. And like, there's a lot of this like toxic masculinity of, you know, who's going to run the group. So I figured we're going to see that a lot. You're always going to see them climbing something precarious while screaming, "Don't look down." And there's always going to be a woman, usually while climbing on something precarious, saying, "I can't do this." And then I think there's going to have to be somebody who goes off from the group to do some heroic act. And right before they leave, there's going to be a dramatic moment of saying, "Promise me you'll be back. Promise me."
Well, I would add as a corollary to that last one that there's always going to be a guy when they leave who says, if I'm not back in X amount of time, do the other plan.
Yes.
If I'm not back in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever that is.
And then they'll be like, oh, if I'm not back in 15 minutes, it'll show them. They'll be like, it's been 16 minutes. We have to leave now.
I was wondering about that because when he said, "I'll be back in 5 minutes," or if I'm not back in 5 minutes, you go tell them to do the other plan. The girl was not wearing a watch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, was she supposed to just be sitting there counting Mississippis until he came back? Because then she runs back all teary-eyed, you know, it's been 5 minutes and he's not back. Of course, that's going to be probably another trope of these movies, is that it's all a fake out. Like, whoever the main guy you're following is, at least one point in the movie, you're probably going to think he's dead. And then he's going to come back as the hero again. But yeah, how do they keep time? Because they probably are yelling a lot about time.
Now that I have no idea. I mean, maybe it's not meant to be 15 exact minutes, but you know, around 15 minutes perhaps. But
I mean, Ernest Borgnine was counting. He had his watch, and
Ernest Borgnine was ready to go the other direction every chance because he thought that they were crazy for doing what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
He's a detective.
Mm.
Yeah. And I also noticed, and we can discuss this too, you know, because of course in a disaster movie, there's gonna be lots of people who die, right? I mean, that's a given. But you have to be looking at your core group of people here, because the body count in this movie is pretty high when you consider that I think only 6 survive by the end. But our core group is mostly intact by the time we get to the end of this movie. So I figured we're gonna have to follow some death rules too while we're doing these disaster movies. And I figure the first deaths that we see are gonna have to be the ones who don't listen. Like, that's going to be the way to establish the hero for the group, is because he's going to say, "We go this way." And there's going to be another guy who says, "No, we go this way." And if you're following the other guy, you're going to have to die pretty quickly, right? So that we know as an audience, we're following the right person. So the first people to die are the ones who don't listen. Then I figure about midway through the movie, they're going to have to kill off a beloved character, right? Because at least somebody that everybody likes is going to have to die, so that you can feel something. And in this case, it was Shelley Winters, you know, and her being a hero and making her swimming attempt and saving somebody. But I did notice that there was that wonderful line of, "Not this woman." Anybody but her. And I thought, well, of course, because everybody loves her. And then at these movies, with these movies, there's always going to have to be the one person, and I'm curious to see how often it's going to be the hero of the movie, but there's always going to be one person who almost makes it, who, like, with 5 minutes left in the movie, when we think everybody's about to get out and get away, is going to be the person who then suddenly dies, so that you feel like, oh no, you were so close. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you think any of these like 70s disaster movies are going to really kill off the core group of people that you're following as much as this movie did?
I'm thinking perhaps so, just because, well, at a nuts and bolts level, there were a lot, not all the same people, but a lot of same people were in acting in these movies, writing these movies, producing and directing these movies. There's kind of like a core group, so they're probably going to follow similar rules. Um, I just want to add to your death rules that Akers died first because he was injured and couldn't keep up. So maybe that's it. Maybe the first death is not just folks who are following the doctor and the nurse, but also just people who just can't. They have a broken leg and they can't make it. We tried to help them, but they got left behind.
See, I would argue he was never really part of the main group because we
Poor
never got his
Akers.
backstory. But we never got his backstory.
Well, we
He
saw him
was
listening to the music and talking about how beautiful it was or whatever.
That's not a backstory, Mel.
I do feel like he was kind of a convenient plot device to help them get them started in the right direction, if nothing else, because he worked on the ship
Precisely.
and kind of knew how to get them pointed towards the engine room.
That's true. That's true.
Precisely.
Yeah. What about the sacrificial character? Because Gene Hackman's character basically sacrifices himself. If he hadn't slipped off the wheel or dropped himself wherever, he would have been burned by the steam. That was why he shut the thing so they wouldn't be burned. I know it was a surprise, but he literally sacrificed himself and even is screaming at God about how he's sacrificing himself while he does it. I just wonder if we're going to see more of that.
I think
The
typically,
hero. Yeah.
it may not be because I mean, Gene Hackman's character was kind of the main character in the group because he was the one whose ideas were always right, basically. And so I don't know that it will always be that character that dies in the coming up disaster movies, but definitely there's I'd be surprised if there wasn't some sort of sacrificial character in all of them, making that greater good sacrifice. You guys go on without me. I'll take care of blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then there will immediately be somebody going, "Do you realize what you're doing?"
Yeah, these people were just so shell shocked at that point. They were just like, wait, is he talking to us or God? Like, they're just staring.
Which, maybe this was me, but I didn't understand why he had to sacrifice himself. Like, he was hanging there, but couldn't he have, like, swung his legs over just a little bit and, like, landed on the walkway that they were going through? Like,
I don't
why did he have to
know.
fall straight down?
That would have been a difficult jump. I feel like he let go, but
I feel like you try. I mean, even if it, I'm thinking if it's between me, like, just letting go and going down into a fiery pit of water and, like, certain death, or at least trying to do a swing jump over to where I might land on something else, I'm going for that maybe might. I don't know that I just this is why I can't watch these movies. It's why I am still angry that I sat through Titanic and I still think that both of them could have fit on the door.
So your team room on the door.
100%.
For this movie, I feel like and this may have been what they were going for and just didn't do a great job of portraying it, but I mean, he was hanging on to that valve for a long time and using his body weight essentially to slowly turn it to close off the valve and stop the steam. So I mean, I almost read it as like he didn't let go so much as his grip just gave out before he could even try to get back. And I know he did yell, take me instead of these other people. And so there was that definite sacrifice thing where he was putting himself in harm's way. But I mean, I don't have the upper body strength to have held on as long as he did, and much less use my body weight to shimmy the valve back in place. So
yeah, it was really difficult. And he's got burning steam blowing on him the whole time. He's burned, his hands are wet. Like, yeah, that would be difficult.
So I mean,
he had enough energy to yell a diatribe at God. That's all I'm saying.
And I'm not disagreeing with you on that point, because yeah, he was yelling at God the whole time he was screwing that thing down. And I did notice, and maybe muttered sarcastically under my breath that we're only really getting a lot of shots of him from like mid chest up. So clearly he's standing on something in real life. Like he's not actually dangling. But yeah, yeah, that's how I think that may have been the intent for it, at least, you know. Maybe they didn't really portray it very well, like a lot of other things in this movie.
I am curious now that I've refreshed my memory with this to go back and rewatch the 2006 remake.
Didn't that have Kurt Russell in it?
Yeah, I think so. It's very
Okay.
fuzzy in my mind. I remember seeing, yeah, it's called Poseidon, I think. And it had Kurt Russell and Josh Lucas. Oddly enough, the year before in 2005, there was also a TV movie version of it called The Poseidon Adventure. So I don't remember what was happening in like the mid-aughts that made us really excited for Poseidon Adventure remakes, but apparently we were really into it.
Oh my gosh, apparently not just Kurt Russell, Richard Dreyfuss was in the 2006 remake.
Yeah. I remember seeing it in the theaters, but I haven't seen it since then. But I'm curious now that this one is fresh in my mind, how it compares and what they kept and what they changed. Yeah, I am really curious about it. Anyway.
There was a sequel to the Poseidon Adventure, right? That was like in the late 70s and it didn't do so well. I cannot remember the title of it though.
It was like
Return to Poseidon?
No, something like, or After Poseidon, or Poseidon is Not Done. That's not the name of it, but it was
If it had been
something
named
along
that,
those
it would have been
lines.
good.
Yeah,
See,
it was
beyond
like
the Poseidon.
Beyond the Poseidon.
Yeah, Beyond the Poseidon
I think
Adventure.
the premise for that is that the ship is still out there, like in the water, and now like salvagers, treasure seekers, or whatever are trying to get into the ship to see what they can get. And I feel like maybe two rival groups both get on the ship at the same time. So maybe it's both a disaster movie, but also like people fighting against people. But I haven't seen it. From what I could tell, it was not very good.
I didn't see any really good reviews. Michael Caine was in it, and Teddy Savalas and Sally Field, apparently.
Well, I guess the paycheck must have been right.
That was a lot of time for a sequel, because this one came out, in 1972, and then the sequel came out in 79. And just in that short period of time, there was a lot of disaster movies.
There was like 4 airports, so.
Oh yeah, the Towering Inferno. Gosh, Swarm,
Earthquake.
Yeah, yeah. There were a lot of them. So it wasn't like the audience was hurting by the time 1979 rolled around and they were thinking, where did all the disaster movies go? Yeah. I did read, Mel, I know you were talking about how bad it was for the actors filming this. I read somewhere that it was rumored to have had up to 125 stuntmen, but only one was actually credited. And I think IMDb had something like 53 listed as working on the movie. But I will say this. For as ridiculous as some of the characterizations were, and how out of touch some of the dialogue was, I mean, for watching in 2020, for a disaster movie, especially given that it came out in 72, the special effects in this movie hold up. I thought anyway. Everything was very believable. The threat felt real. Like the water effects, the fire effects, the ship, moving and things like rolling over. All of it felt very well done. Like I enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, I thought I mean, when you think about the difficulty and the work it took to make that dining hall or banquet hall, or you want to call it, turn upside down. And of course, I mean, you've got the literal, like their worlds have been turned upside down, as I was like joking earlier. So you've got the little moments where they go into a restroom and everything's upside down, or they go into a bunk and everything's upside down. But that first moment when they're just partying and, because it's the new year, and then all of a sudden they get turned over. Yeah, I mean, the people falling, the stuff falling on them, the crashing through the window. It was all like, there was nothing really that happened that I didn't think probably would happen if you were on a ship in the middle of the ocean, which is like, I am terrified of the ocean. So I'm not going to be on a ship in the middle of the ocean where I can't see any land. And then I don't want to get hit by one of these weird waves that come out of nowhere, even in real life, and capsize boats and stuff. So for me, I was, even if there were parts where I was like, this is obviously a movie, it's unsettling. And I think they did a really good job of showing how these people who are just partying and relaxing, thinking they're on this like cruise to go visit family, then they're falling through the air and stuff starts attaching from the ceiling. And yeah, the fires, the way that the ship was blowing up in certain parts that would affect them. There wasn't much of the movie that was really jarring to me that I was like, this makes so little sense that I can't even like watch this anymore. Like nothing really gave me pause. I just went with it.
Yeah, I agree too about the special effects. And I mean, it was nominated for an Oscar for the special effects, wasn't it?
That and the music, I think, were the two, right?
I think Shelley Winters was also nominated. I don't think she won, but I think she was nominated for it
For
for her
supporting
performance.
actress.
Mm-hmm. I think
Yeah,
so.
she was nominated. So it won 2 Academy Awards, you're right, for the special effects and for music. Actually, I think the Academy Award was for one particular song. And then the score, which was done by John Williams, was also nominated for multiple things. Shelley Winters was nominated for the Academy Award, which I don't think she won. I'm not sure who won that year, but she did win the Golden Globe for this. So yeah, I mean, and you gotta think, man, for a disaster movie to win at the Academy Awards and Golden Globes, I don't think that happens a whole lot.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, usually these are like pulpy summer fare. I know that this was kind of before the era of the summer blockbuster type thing, but this was definitely not the type of genre I think that most people in the Academy would have said, yes, let's nominate for things. But yeah, I mean, special effects definitely hold up. And I mean, I thought Shelley Winters was great. I couldn't tell you like by name the other people that were nominated in 1972. So I don't know what the basis is that she was running against or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's as far as disaster movies go, this is kind of I'd say that this is kind of it sets the bar, and it sets it pretty high because it's a very early disaster movie too. So it's probably also before it developed into its own subgenre.
Well, and one of the things
I
that,
will tell.
no, Lisa, you want to go ahead or?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, Matt, we have a very nifty little invention called Google. And Cloris Leachman won Best Supporting Actress that year. So for um the last picture show.
Well, okay then.
At least that's what it says. So, um Sure.
Congratulations, Cloris Leachman.
Congratulations, Cloris Leachman. Let me see if that was the right one. But anyway, sorry, that was snarky of me, Mel. What were you gonna say?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think you're right, Matt, that even though it was an airport had come out in 1970, and I think some of the folks involved with Poseidon Adventure wanted to like make that money because people seem to like these sorts of things. It is early on in disaster films. And so, yeah, getting the Oscar nod is really, really kind of cool. But one of the things, one of the many things that surprised me when I was reading about the movie was that it has this really intense cult status and fan base. I had no idea. And I stumbled upon this article from the New York Times, and it was published in 2006. And it starts out by talking about all the different disaster films that we've already mentioned. But apparently, the Poseidon Adventure is is the one with like the most fan base even today. So this article was coming out in 2006, and the person who wrote it was talking about how there was about to be there's the Poseidon Adventure fan club has apparently like reunions or conventions or something like every year. I think they said that a lot of the not all the stars, but several of the stars have come to meet the fans. I think was it Gene Hackman has not, and Red Buttons did not. But I think Carol Lindley was involved. She often joked that she wanted to throw her clothes away after doing the movie when they asked her if she wanted to take her wardrobe with her because it was so gross and shrunken and full of water. But she said she found out later she could have made a ton of money selling pieces of the wardrobe to Poseidon fans. People make models of the ship that they then try to reenact different parts of the movie with, I guess, like turning the ship over or whatever. People talk about how they watch the movie hundreds of times. And the thing that they say over and over again that they enjoy is one, the characters. They talk about it as a character-driven drama, and two, this idea, the philosophical ideas about like religion and the will to live, I guess, because they talk about how in other disaster movies, people would just sit and wait for someone to get them. But these people were actually going to go to the place where the hole was thinnest and try to get out. And so apparently fans very much enjoy the fact that these folks were on a mission to get out no matter what happened, as opposed to listening to the authority figures from the outside, like in Towering Inferno or something like that. So I had no idea there was like a whole like almost like Star Trek, like Trekkers type thing or something going on with Poseidon Adventure. And apparently they don't like the later incarnations. They just like the original 1972 movie. At least the ones interviewed for this piece did.
See, now I've never seen the Towering Inferno. And now I'm wondering how this compares to that, because if people like this because it's kind of like almost like a subversive group, like this group of outsiders who are going against what authority says, and they're the ones who survive, as if you kind of have some sort of, you're tapping into some sort of knowledge that that everybody else doesn't have. I could see how that could be appealing to a certain group of people. So I don't know. Now I'm just curious, because if that's markedly different from something like the Towering Inferno, I'm curious to see how they measure up, especially with the kind of an eye towards who's listening to authority and who has authority, and like who's supposed to keep us safe. Because I think that's another thing in these movies that is really interesting and kind of telling about us, because it's not just the links you would go through to survive. And with any of these kind of this almost kind of goes with post-apocalyptic, everything we've talked about with post-apocalyptic movies and literature. When you have these disaster films, you get to see who has it within them to survive, to do what it takes when it actually happens, who has it within them to do the hard things to survive, but then also who has the ability to keep us safe. Because in this case, it was the kind of rogue minister, the one who said, very, when we didn't even talk about this line, Mel, you kind of alluded to it, but he was the one who said, I don't believe that you pray to God to help you, that God has already given you what you need. And you just have to like kind of find it within yourself to find that help. And then that's you working with God. It was, I'm butchering the line, but it was something along those lines. It was something that was very much, you can't just sit back and wait. In other words, for help to be like given to you. It's something you have to take yourself. It's something you have to like dig down deep within yourself to find. And that certainly fits with the disaster movie. But I don't know. It said that's really interesting because it's kind of telling about each of these disaster movies, where that help comes from and where that authority comes from, and where the help doesn't come from. Because in this case, the help didn't come from anybody who should be giving that help, right? It didn't come from the captain of the ship. It didn't come from, the people who were supposed to quote unquote know how to help. It came from a rogue preacher and a little child. So I don't know. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think like what you were saying earlier, that we would need to watch the other movies to be absolutely sure. But I mean, there's a quote in this article where the president of the Poseidon Adventure fan club says, in airport, the passengers waited to be saved. He says in the towering inferno, they waited for the firemen to get them out. And here they, these characters are looking for something. And yeah, it is an interesting, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are going to listen to Purser and be like, well, he's been on many of these voyages. He's trained. He knows what's going on. And we should, I think, in some way, like if you're on an airplane and the stewardesses are telling you to do something, then you should follow what they're saying. But I think you're right that this movie is questioning if something this unprecedented and weird happens. This ship is like has a ballast problem and it gets hit by a tsunami and you're upside down. Are necessarily the doctors and the nurses and the purser and all these people, even if they've been on many journeys and even if they've drilled, are they really going to know what to do in this kind of situation? Are they going to know what to do when the people above, everybody who's above them is obviously dead because they're underwater, and when parts of the ship are going to be on fire because of the way they turned over? So yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it, that a child and this preacher are the ones who kind of push them to survive, even if they're too scared to. Because the Shelley Winters character almost tries to quit a couple times because she's just like, take this gift for the grandson and go on. I don't know if I can make it. But the preacher just kind of keeps them going and keeps their hope going. Whereas if they follow the guy who told them to go to lifeboats, there weren't any lifeboat. You're upside down. The lifeboats are useless. Or if they followed the purser, or they followed the doctor, or they followed the steward, they would not have gotten out. So yeah, that is interesting. And especially now that we're in a world where we're not quite sure what keeps us safe, or there's a lot of confusion. You can kind of see it it's like a microcosm on the Poseidon as to what happens when people are faced with stuff that's larger than them and out of their control.
One thing, Mel, that I noticed when you were talking, because you're absolutely right, and it does feel like a weird microcosm of the time we're living in, where even the people who are supposed to hold the authority are shouting what to do, and we all still feel like, what's going on? I can see that. But one thing I noticed, and I don't even think it really came to light until you were talking, but when you were talking about Shelley Winter's character, about how several times she kept trying to give the piece of jewelry to Grandpa Joe to give to their grandson, because she was like convinced she wasn't going to make it. I think out of the survivors, there were 4 women that followed them. There was the daughter, the sister of the freckled kid. I can never remember either of their names. There was Grandpa Joe's wife. There was, it must be telling, I can't remember many of their names. There was a singer who lost her brother, and then there was the fallen woman, the the lady of the night, or I guess the former lady of the night,
The
the
lady of
detective's
last
wife,
night.
the lady of last. Yeah, I don't know. Um, but all of them at some point, I feel like had a moment of I can't do this. Like I can't keep going on. Because the singer at one point when she was with Red Button's character, they were in the upside down hair salon, the barber shop, and she basically curls up in the fetal position and is like, I can't go on without my brother anymore. And he has to prompt her and talk her through that. Um, Grandpa Joe's wife has her moments of where she thinks she can't make it. And her thing is she thinks physically she can't make it. She thinks she's too old. She thinks she's too out of shape. Um, and I feel like with the other characters, they both of them had their moments, maybe smaller ones, but had their moments where they couldn't keep going. I think the detective's wife at one point when they were climbing up a ladder, I think she was the one. The line was yelled, "Don't look down," and she looked down. She looks down and kind of freaks out, and it has to be prompted through. That's a little bit of a disturbing message to have, where every single one of the main female characters has to have a moment where they're prompted by the men to keep going. I don't think I like that message. I hope some of these other movies change that, because let's remember they're doing this in heels. So they arguably have the harder job out of all this.
That is very true.
Yeah.
The daughter, she was like obsessed with Gene Hackman's character, so I think she just kind of kept going. I don't remember her, the girl, the teenager. I don't did she try to
Yeah.
give up at some point? I don't It's hard to remember her because she didn't really do very much.
No, but I feel like maybe she didn't quite give up in the way they did, but because she was so attached to his character that when he's not with them, she kind of turns into a puddle of goo.
Yeah, that's true. And I think she might have
You
wanted to
know?
stay in the banquet hall at first because I think she was kind of believing the people in charge. I don't know. I'd have to watch it again, but I feel like she wasn't as gung ho about climbing the tree at first.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out her character really, because she was obviously supposed to be a teenager. I felt very uncomfortable with the way some of the men were treating her.
Mhm.
And I felt uncomfortable because she did have that attachment to the rogue preacher. And to his credit, he never seemed inappropriate towards her. I think he just wanted to like help her and her brother, but it was almost like she was, from her point of view, was like almost falling in love with him. And I didn't understand why the movie was pushing that. Um but maybe it was just the idea of they were in an intense situation, and she needed somebody to take control, and that he was the person for her.
Yeah, she need to look
So,
toward him.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of icky, the way they did that with the female characters, I think. But I don't know, maybe we have hope for some of these other ones, because listeners, we're going to be watching a few more disaster movies over the summer. This is good. We've done the summer of sci-fi, and now we are doing the summer of 70s disaster movies. So you're going to get to join us for a lot of these. Um,
Earthquakes, vehicles, yeah, insects, all sorts of
fires.
fires, yeah.
Yeah, airplanes. But I'm with you, Mel. Out of all of these, like you're not going to find me on a cruise ship, because when we really get down to like things that spark an existential dread within me, it is the ocean. It is the vastness, like knowing there is so much beneath you. And I mean, even thinking about it now, like when they were swimming through and holding onto the rope and having to hold their breath, that was as close to panic as I got watching that movie. Like it really triggered something deep inside me that I was was like, I'll be glad if our next disaster movie does not involve the sinking of a boat.
Yeah, I was terrified. I mean, I can't swim, so I was basically like the pop singer who lost her brother. Like, I'm like, well, I'm done for now, like I'm stuck here. So yeah, it's like my worst fear. On a personal
Yeah.
note, I did a whale watching tour many years ago. I am so glad I did it because it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, being in a boat that was relatively large and feeling tiny over top of huge whales that were right up next to us. But I was terrified and I don't know if I could do it again. I was like, I'm going to do this because I want to experience this. But the thought of animals that large in something that large, at one point they're like, oh, there's like at least a mile or two beneath us now. And I'm like,
No.
inside I'm screaming. Outside I'm like, oh, look at the awesome whales. I'm glad I'm experiencing this. So yeah, that is existential dread, panic, and terror is definitely what I feel when I'm contemplating that. So
Yeah, when you just said there was a mile beneath you, I was like, and that is why I will not be on a ship. All right. Okay. Yeah, now I'm gonna have to go, like, I don't know, watch something cute and fluffy because that made me super uncomfortable. All right, well, listeners, with that, with that delving deep into Mel and Lisa's deepest fears, um, we're going to end that here. We'd love to hear from you guys, especially if you share our existential dread of oceans, and if you would ever go on one of these cruise ships. I would love to know. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, you can send us an email at nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon, and you'll get access to exclusive content, which I hope will be free of all sorts of mile deep ocean things. Oh my goodness. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free. And it also helps other listeners find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode and a brand new disaster movie.